With the Yankees, Derek Jeter became known as one of the biggest stars in all of baseball. He is the captain, one of the greatest leaders and players to ever play the game. He is one of the best and most popular players of an era, and when it was time for him to be voted for the Hall of Fame, he came just one vote shy of being a unanimous first ballot Hall of Famer. There is no question, however, that a lot of his legacy was helped by the fact that he played for the Yankees, a winning franchise in baseball's biggest market. From the beginning, though, he almost never had a chance to even be a Yankee. In the 1992 draft, the Reds had the pick before the Yankees. Red scout Gene Bennett begged the team to draft Jeter. Instead, Cincinnati drafted Chad Mottola, an outfielder who would only ever play 59 big league games. While in New York, Jeter became a baseball legend. With that all being said, it must be asked, what if things were different? What if Bennett was able to convince his team to draft Jeter? The answer, of course, is that everything changes. We start out in Jeter's first full season, 1996, and we actually start out with the first big trade so far. As before the season, Tony Fernandez goes down with an injury, and because the Yankees don't have Jeter, they need a shortstop. So the Yankees trade for Seattle shortstop Felix Fermin, and in return, they send Seattle a young pitcher named Mariano Rivera. As for the actual games, up in the Bronx, losing half of the core four proves costly for the Yankees, as they barely even get to 500 and miss the playoffs. Instead, it's the Indians who make it out of the AL, and it's the Indians who are unable to pull out a Game 7 against the Braves, meaning that it's the Braves that win the World Series as the team of the 90s gets its second straight ring. Moving on to the 1997 draft, the Reds move down a few picks, which actually helps Cincinnati, as they land an all-star bat in Lance Berkman. Moving on to the offseason, the Reds have two future Hall of Famers in their middle infield, which means Bret Boone is tradable. Cincinnati will do just that, trading Boone to the Dodgers for pitcher Ishmael Valdez. This brings us to the 1997 regular season, where it becomes clear that Bret Boone is not the answer the Dodgers were looking for at second, as him and his team both struggle down the stretch and finish just one game over 500. Meanwhile, over in the NL Central, the Reds are able to take advantage of the Central being pretty weak this year and go on a run to win the division. They are able to beat the Braves in the NLDS this year, but they still go down to the Marlins in the NLCS, who still beat the Indians to win the 1997 World Series. Now we look ahead to the 1998 MLB draft, where we start out at pick 17, as the Dodgers are able to steal away a dominant closer with Brad Lidge. In the end, though, I don't think Houston is all that mad about losing out on Lidge, because they now have their ace of the future, a future Cy Young winner named CC Sabathia. This brings us to the 1998 offseason, where the Yankees are again in need of a shortstop. They look to fill that hole in free agency and sign Jay Bell. With that, we can look ahead to the 1998 regular season, where there is one team that is taking up all of the headlines. As over in the Bronx, the Yankees do lose an extra 8 games, but still win 106 games and walk through the AL all the way to the World Series. New York matches up with the Padres in that World Series, and San Diego ends up being overmatched by a dominant Yankees team, as the Padres are able to push it to 5, but the Yankees still win the 1998 World Series. Now it's time for the 1999 draft, where Jay Bell signing with the Yankees instead of the D-backs ends up being massive, as Arizona moves up to the number 2 pick, and with that pick, the D-backs land a future all-star arm, as they're able to steal away Josh Beckett. Meanwhile, in the rest of the draft, Baltimore gets Brett Myers at 12, and the Mariners get Alex Rios at 19. Now it's the offseason, and again the Jay Bell signing causes massive changes, as without Bell, the D-backs are no longer able to convince Randy Johnson that they can be contenders, and so the California native returns home, signing with the LA Dodgers in a huge move. In other news, Steve Finley returns to San Diego, and now it's the 1999 season, and in this season, the new look NL West has become the most wide open division in all of baseball. At times, it seems like every team has a chance to win the division, but in the end, it's Jeff Kent and Barry Bonds who are able to lead the Giants to win the West, beating out Randy Johnson and the Dodgers by a game. That all being said, the NL West is not the biggest story of this season, as over in the Central, the Reds have a dominant year. Cincinnati puts up a staggering 107 wins, winning the Central as their best player. Derek Jeter earns the NL MVP. In the AL, the MVP goes to the Cy Young winner Pedro Martinez, who destroys hitters as the ace of the division-winning Red Sox. Behind his dominance, the Red Sox are able to take care of business in the AL playoffs, advancing to face the winner of the Reds vs. Mets NLCS. This series will prove to be a great matchup, going all 7 games, but in the end, it's the Reds who move on to meet up with the Red Sox in the World Series. Reds fans see this series as a win on paper, and while Pedro is able to shut their offense down in Game 1, after that, the Reds offense comes to life. The middle of their order steps up as the Reds win 4 straight to close out the 90s with a World Series championship. Leading into the new century, the World Series champion Reds look to bolster their pitching rotation. To do it, they snatch up Hideo Nomo in free agency, while in the trade market, Cincy still trades for Ken Griffey Jr., this time for Pokey Reese and Mike Cameron. Now it's time for the first season of the 2000s, a season that is headlined by the division races of the AL West and NL Central. In the West, it's the Mariners who are able to pull away at the end of the season and win their division by 3.5 games. Meanwhile, the Reds are able to pick up Curt Schilling at the trade deadline, sending Adam Dunn and Drew Henson to Philly in the process, and in turn, Cincinnati goes on a run as they go on a 10-game win streak to end the season and win the division by 4 games. As for number 2, the Cardinals are in the NL's wildcard with 96 wins as they advance to the NLCS where they meet up with the Reds. Unfortunately for St. Louis though, Cincinnati is just the better team this year, and as a result, they head to the World Series, meeting up with the AL winners, the Seattle Mariners. This series is immediately pegged as a battle of 2 of baseball's best young middle infielders, and overall in this series, Alex Rodriguez dominates, but Jeter dominates even more, and in what is also a homecoming series for Ken Griffey Jr., it's Jr. who earns World Series MVP as Curt Schilling closes out the final Game 6 and the Reds earn their 2nd straight World Series. This leads us straight into the 2001 draft, where the Cubs lost a few extra games, so them and the Twins swap picks, and with that change, Chicago gets a future MVP and face of the franchise with Joe Mauer, while the Twins, they get a guy who, at least for a couple years, will be a serious Cy Young candidate with Mark Prior. Continuing on, down at number 6, the Astros are able to continue to solidify their young core as they land themselves Mark Teixeira. Now, we can head into the 0-1 offseason where the Rangers still offer and A-Rod still signs the largest contract in baseball history. Meanwhile, Manny Ramirez still goes to Boston and Mike Mussina goes to the Mets. Now we enter the 2001 regular season where again the biggest divisional story comes in the NL Central. As over in St. Louis, the Cardinals earn 93 wins, and in a close race, they finish in 2nd as they're the wildcard team and the Astros win the division with 96 wins. Meanwhile, over in the AL West, the Seattle Mariners are simply dominant. They are led by the AL's MVP and Rookie of the Year, Ichiro Suzuki, and they break the Major League record for wins in a season with an absurd total of 119. The Mariners in their division, the AL West, are the complete opposite story of the East. As over in the East, the Blue Jays win the division with just 80 wins as the Red Sox and the Yankees both completely fall apart. Unfortunately for Toronto, this means that they now have the privilege of being absolutely pummeled by the Mariners in the ALDS. And as for the Mariners, there's now nobody left in the AL to stop them, so they go to the World Series. To fill the other half of the matchup, the Cardinals and the Braves meet up in the NLCS. Ultimately, the Braves take care of business, so they move on to match up with the Mariners in the World Series. In this series, the Braves jump out to a 3-1 series lead, and they get a 3-0 lead in Game 7. The Mariners, however, are able to fight back, as catcher Dan Wilson hits the game-tying home run, and Edgar Martinez walks off Game 7, so the Mariners win the World Series on a walk-off home run. Congratulations to the Mariners as we now move on to the 2002 draft, where we begin at pick 15. With that pick, the D-backs continue their recent draft luck as they land Nick Swisher with that 15th pick. Meanwhile, the picks before and after that 15th pick both belong to the A's, and they use those picks to land 2 frontline starters as they get both Scott Kazmir and Cole Hamill. Angels. Continuing on, the Phillies get Denard Span, the Reds get another draft steal as they land Matt Cain at 25, and with that being said, now we look ahead to the 2002 offseason, where the reason why the A's had so many first-round picks was that the 2002 free agent class was not very kind to Oakland, as they still lose all of Damon, Giambi, and Isringhausen to Boston, New York, and St. Louis, but in the 2002 season, the A's don't seem too upset about losing those guys, as the Moneyball A's win 103 games to top the AL West. There are some other changes, but ultimately, the end of this season ends up being the same as it was before, as the Angels conquer the Giants in 7 to win the 2002 World Series. This leads us right into the 03 draft, where there aren't any interesting changes until we get into the 20s. There, Chad Billingsley goes to the A's at 24 and Carlos Quentin goes to the Dodgers at 29. Other than that, the rest of the draft and offseason stays the same, so we head into the regular season where the LA Dodgers are finally relevant again. They are in the NL's wildcard with a 90-win season, and when they get to the NLDS, they match up with the NL West winners, the San Francisco Giants. This Giants team had dominated to the tune of a 100-win season, but here they go down, so the Dodgers look for their matchup in the NLCS. Meeting them is the team with the best record in the majors, the Atlanta Braves. Atlanta comes in fresh off a 101-win season, but LA's rotation with Randy Johnson and Kevin Brown is able to shut the Braves' high-powered offense down, so the Dodgers go to the World Series. Meanwhile, over in the junior circuit, the Red Sox run through the AL East and dominate the A's in the ALDS. In the ALCS, the battle-tested Mariners are at least able to make things interesting, but the Red Sox still move on to try for their first World Series title since 1918. The talk of this series is the battle between two future no-doubt Hall of Famers, as Randy Johnson and the Dodgers meet up with Pedro Martinez and the Red Sox. In the end, though, this series isn't all that close, as Johnson isn't 100% and the Red Sox take advantage, as Boston breaks the curse of the Bambino and earns their first World Series title in 85 years. Continuing on, it's the offseason and A-Rod has requested a trade out of Texas and said he wants to go to a big market to a contender. Two suitors jump to the top of the list, and very quickly a trade to the Red Sox is in place. Much like in real life, though, the MLBPA vetoes the move, so the Red Sox look to their other option. As for the other option, the Dodgers feel like they are one piece away, so they send the Rangers an offer of Shawn Green, Edwin Jackson, and Paul Shuey, and in return, Alex Rodriguez gets traded to the Dodgers in an enormous move. Continuing on, Boston is unable to trade for Curt Schilling because the Reds think they can still be contenders and have no interest in trading him. In the rest of the offseason, Sheffield still goes to the Yankees, Guerrero goes to the Angels, and now it's the 2004 draft. There isn't a lot to talk about here, so just know the Orioles get Homer Bailey, the D-backs get Billy Butler, and the Phillies try to replace Cole Hamels with Phil Hughes. With that all being said, it's finally time for the 2004 regular season, where the Angels win 93 games and are able to take the American League West and in turn run through a pretty weak American League all the way to the World Series. The Angels' accomplishments end up being pretty much overshadowed though, because over in the NL, the other LA team, the Dodgers, are just insane. They roll through everybody on their way to 19 extra wins and 112 wins in total. And in the playoffs, they are only really even challenged by the wildcard Reds in the NLDS, as LA sweeps the Cardinals and beats the Angels in 5. And on the back of Randy Johnson's complete game in Game 5, the Dodgers win the 2004 World Series. Moving forward from there, it's the 2005 offseason, where Barry Larkin retires after the 04 season, which means Derek Jeter moves over to shortstop and the Reds need a second baseman. To fill that void, they are able to steal away Placido Polanco from the Phillies in free agency. Over in LA, the Dodgers re-sign Adrian Beltre because he was just a key piece to their championship team, and in Kansas City, the Royals sign Rich Aurilia. The Red Sox commit to and succeed at re-signing Pedro, and now it's the 2005 draft. For the first time in a while, some interesting stuff finally happens in this year's draft. Starting at pick 5, the Brewers take a different future All-Star named Ryan as they take Ryan Zimmerman. The Mariners are pretty happy with that arrangement as they land a future MVP named Ryan with Ryan Braun. Those picks will work out pretty well for both of the teams involved, and for the Mets, things are working out pretty well too. They draft Jay Bruce, while down at the 23rd pick, the A's continue their run of great drafts as they pick Jacoby Ellsbury. Continuing on to the supplemental supplemental first, both the Red Sox and the Dodgers re-sign their stars, which means they don't have compensation picks. This means that the Cardinals end up with Clay Buchholz just because there isn't really anyone else there to take him. That all being said though, it is now time for the 2005 regular season. There are some big winners here, but the biggest loser is definitely the Yankees. As the season after being in the playoffs, they barely even crack 70 wins and don't come even close to making it back. Over in Hollywood, the story is pretty much the exact opposite, as the Dodgers dominate the NL West with just 92 wins and A-Rod beats out Albert Pujols for the NL MVP. At the end though, this season ends the same as it did in real life, with the White Sox sweeping the Astros to win the 2005 World Series. Fast forwarding to the 2006 draft, the Yankees were so bad in 2005 that they move up to the number 8 pick, and so the Yankees land Clayton Kershaw, who is a generational pitcher and a great centerpiece to a rebuild for sure. That makes for a future multi-time Cy Young winner changing places at pick number 8, and at pick number 6, another one does too. As pretty soon, Tim Lincecum will be probably the best thing to ever happen to pitching in Colorado. With the pick in between those two picks, Drew Stubbs goes to the Rangers at 7, and now it's time for the 2006 offseason. The Yankees have a bunch of holes that they need to fill, so they look to the free agent market to try to plug some. As a result, the Yankees do Yankee things and sign both Rafael Furcal and Johnny Damon. Meanwhile, the Red Sox are unable to trade for Josh Beckett because the Marlins no longer have Josh Beckett, and the D-backs think that he's a valuable piece for their future. With that though, we move on to the 06 season, where the Reds are back to being prime contenders again, as behind their deep lineup of Jeter, Polanco, Griffey, Berkman, Edwin Encarnacion, and a young Brandon Phillips, the Reds steamroll their way through the NL Central and through the NLDS to meet up with the 95-win Dodgers in the NLCS. While this series looks like a pretty even matchup on paper, the Reds are able to end it pretty quickly, as it only takes 5 games for Cincinnati to eliminate the Dodgers and advance to the World Series. In the AL, the Yankees' efforts to get back in the playoffs actually work out pretty well, as while they do lose an extra 11 games and only win 86 games on the year, that ends up being enough to get them out of what's still a pretty weak AL East. Those good feelings end pretty quickly in the playoffs though, as the Yankees get swept by the A's in the ALDS, who move on to match up with the Tigers in the championship series. The Tigers are the winners of the AL Central, and now they become the winners of the American League, as they are just way too much for the A's to handle. This means that the Tigers will match up with the Reds in the World Series, and this one ends up not really even being a contest. As for the Reds, Edwin Encarnacion hits 3 home runs in Game 4, and the Reds complete the sweep to win the 2006 World Series. From there, it's on to the 2007 draft, where the Nationals move up to the number 2 pick, which means Matt Wieters switches sides to the Beltway series as he goes to the Nats. At pick 10, Jason Hayward goes to the Rockies. 2 picks later, with the 12th pick, the Rangers get a total steal as they land Madison Bumgarner. The Braves get Devin Mesoraco at 13. The Yankees get Rick Porcello at 21. The Royals pick up Todd Frazier with Richard Ilias' compensation pick, and with the rest of the offseason staying the same from there, it's now time for the 2007 regular season. We're actually going to start this year at the trade deadline because the Astros are far too close to being contenders to be sellers, so Mark Teixeira is not traded at the deadline. This in turn saves the Braves from trading nearly half of a championship core for what is basically a rental. In the short run though, this change really doesn't change all that much, as the Astros fade down the stretch and still don't make the playoffs. The team from the Central who does make the playoffs, the Reds, end up getting dispatched by the Rockies in the NLDS, who in turn move on to meet up with the D-backs in the NLCS. The D-backs take games 1 and 5 behind dominant performances by Josh Beckett, but the other 4 games are all swept by the Rockies. This means that the Rockies move on in 6, looking ahead to the World Series, where on the AL side, the Angels sweep through both the ALDS and ALCS, which in the World Series ends up being a bad thing, as it's the Angels who lose all of their momentum and it's the Rockies who keep all of theirs, sweeping the Angels to win the World Series. Looking forward to the 08 offseason, Mariano Rivera looks for a new home in free agency after some years in Seattle, so he goes to LA and joins a contender with the Angels. On the other hand, in the rest of free agency, Jorge Posada signs with the Mets, Mike Lowell signs with the Phillies, and those Phillies still trade the same package, this time to the Dodgers for Brad Lidge. With that, it's time for the 2008 draft, where the Giants move up to the number 2 pick, so Eric Hosmer goes goes to the Bay. Hosmer is a future All-Star, so this is a pretty good pick. But unfortunately for San Fran, this will actually be a downgrade over what they originally got, as Kansas City has the 4th pick, and
the Kansas City Royals select Gerald D. Posey.
Yeah, in a few years, Ned Yost is going to have to figure out how to balance playing time between Salvi Perez and Buster Posey, but I am sure that is a problem most teams would kill to have. With the rest of the draft, the only other interesting change comes at pick number 12 as Jason Castro goes to the Cardinals, and now it's time for the 08 regular season. For the 2nd straight year, we're gonna start the trade deadline, as the Phillies have a logjam in the outfield but badly need a frontline starter without Cole Hamels. To fix that, the Phillies send the Padres a package of Adam Dunn, Denard Span, and some low-level prospects, and in return, Jake Peavy joins the Phillies, and with his help, the Phillies go on a massive surge in the second half to top the NL East. They meet up with the West winners, the Dodgers, in the NLDS, and they're able to beat them pretty quickly, so they move on for a matchup with a Reds team that just finished yet another 90-win season in the Derek Jeter era. Their 93 wins earn them the NL wildcard, and to get here, they beat the NL Central champion Astros in the NLDS. In this series, though, the Reds are overmatched as they go down to the Phillies in 5 games, and the Phillies move on to the World Series. The most surprising teams in the league this year came in the American League, as both the A's and the Rays come out of absolutely nowhere to each win 91 games apiece. It is the A's who earn the wild card over the Rays behind their great pitching, and behind that great pitching, they beat the Angels in the ALDS. Their dream season ends there, though, as their lack of offense comes back to bite them, and in turn, the Red Sox beat them to advance to the World Series. This means that we will have a Red Sox versus Phillies World Series, and in this one, a very old Pedro gets badly outpitched by Jake Peavy in Game 1, and the Red Sox can never recover, as the losses of guys like Beckett and Ellsbury come back to bite the Red Sox, and they lose in 6 as the Phillies are the 2008 World Champions of Baseball. Fast forwarding to the 2009 offseason, Mark Teixeira is a free agent, and he is looking to play for a contender. The Astros do try to make a run at keeping him, but in the end, it's the Red Sox, fresh off of a World Series loss, who give Teixeira an offer he can't refuse. With that, Teixeira goes to Boston, and as for his former Astro teammate CC Sabathia, he too is looking to play for a contender. That contender ends up being the Dodgers, as Sabathia goes to Hollywood and joins what looks to be a scary Dodgers team. With the rest of free agency, Randy Johnson stays with the Dodgers for his farewell tour, AJ Burnett helps bolster the Reds rotation, and with that being it for the 2009 free agent class, it's now time for the huge 2009 draft. And in this draft, there are some enormous changes coming as we go down to pick 24, where
the Chicago Cubs select Michael Trout.
The Cubs land the steal of a lifetime as they pair Joe Mauer with Mike Trout, which adding a player who will be the best player in baseball by the time he's 21 will definitely help speed up the Cubs rebuild a lot. Looking at the rest of the draft, with the rest of the changes, Zach Wheeler joins the Braves rotation at pick number 5, Mike Minor goes to the Tigers at pick 7, AJ Pollock goes to the White Sox at 8, and Mike Leake heads to the Twins at pick 10. Now though, with all of that, we can advance to the 2009 regular season, but before we can start, we have some more deadline moves that we need to discuss. As there is a huge arms race developing between the Phillies and the Dodgers, and the Reds, they feel like they're close to being left behind. And because Cincinnati does lead the NL Central at the trade deadline, they look to make a move for a proven ace. They throw together a package of Chris Valaika, Pedro Viola, Justin Turner, and Chris Heisey, and they send that to Cleveland for Cliff Lee. Behind their improved rotation, Cincinnati surges at the end of the season to pretty easily take the Central. The only team that's able to top Cincinnati's 102 wins is the LA Dodgers, who ride their dominant roster to an insane 106 wins. Come playoff time, the Dodgers get the tough draw of having to deal with the Phillies in the NLDS. Unfortunately for Philadelphia, though, a repeat is not in the cards as the Dodgers take care of business and move on for a matchup with the Reds in the NLCS. This series looks to be a wild matchup between two dominant 100-win teams, and ultimately it does take 6 games, but the Reds advance to the World Series, and as for their opponent in that series, the AL is going to have somebody new this year, because while Boston does still earn the AL's top seed with 102 wins, they get pushed to 5 games by the 79-win Central winning Tigers. That long series comes back to bite the Red Sox in the ALCS as they lose in 5 games to the wildcard Mariners. This means that Seattle moves on for the second Reds vs Mariners World Series of Derek Jeter's career. The big difference this time time is that the Mariners no longer have A-Rod, and now they aren't able to match up with Cincinnati as the Reds earned the 2009 World Series championship. With that, the 2010 draft is here and some changes are coming as Kansas City slides into the number 3 pick, and so Buster Posey is going to have some all-star help coming in Kansas City as Manny Machado joins the Royals with the 3rd pick. Machado is not the only huge change to happen in the top 10, as at pick 6, Matt Harvey will be a bona fide ace for the Pirates at least for a little bit. Speaking of aces, another one goes off the board at pick 7 as the Yankees land a future Cy Young candidate with Chris Sale. In other news, at pick number 12, the Giants try to replace Buster Posey and end up with a future all-star catcher named Yasmani Grandal. Moving forward, the Cubs somehow managed to land their second MVP in the 20s in as many drafts as they pair Mike Trout with Christian Yelich with the 23rd pick. After that, the only interesting change in the rest of the draft and offseason is Orlando Cabrera going to the Mariners in free agency, and so we move on to the 2010 regular season. This season, the NL West has suddenly become absolutely loaded. 3 teams finish over 90 wins as the Padres look like the frontrunner for much of the year but end up tying the Rockies and missing the playoffs as the Rockies end up being the wildcard team and the Dodgers win the division. As for those Dodgers, their playoff run comes to an end in the NLDS as the bats of Olley and Howard lead the Phillies to a 4-game series win. Matching up to face the Phillies in the championship series, the Rockies meet up with the 1-seeded Reds. In this series, the NL's top seed goes down too, as it's the Rockies' rotation with Ubaldo and Tim Winsicom who shuts down the Reds lineup. This sets up for what looks to be a wild NLCS, but in reality, it ends up being anything but, as the Phillies just outclass the Rockies and move on to the World Series. Looking to the junior circuit, the AL ends up being pretty weak this year, and with a big gap between the 2 best teams and everybody else, the Rangers and the Rays both sweep their way to the ALCS. These are the 2 best teams in the American League by far. However, Texas ends up getting badly outplayed by the Rays, who move on to go to the World Series. As much hype as this series receives, the Phillies offense outhits the Rays offense by a lot, and the Phillies rotation with Halladay, Oswalt, Peavy, and a fastly emerging Phil Hughes dominates the Rays offense. Behind that rotation, in 6 games, the Phillies win their 2nd World Series in 3 years. Looking ahead to the 2011 offseason, it's free agency and Cliff Lee signs with the Yankees, joining a rotation with Clayton Kershaw that is going to be absolutely dominant. Meanwhile, in Boston, because the Red Sox have Mark Teixeira, they're no longer in the market for Adrian Gonzalez. This means that Gonzalez at least starts the 2011 season with the Padres. From there, in the rest of the offseason, Carl Crawford still goes to Boston, Adrian Beltre still goes to Texas, Freddie Garcia joins him in Texas, and with that, it's time for the loaded 2011 draft. The changes start right away as the Nationals have their 3rd straight number 1 pick, and with that pick, the Nationals have their 3rd straight star with a number 1 pick as they add Garrett Cole to a team that already has Bryce Harper and Steven Strasburg. As for Cole's original team, Pittsburgh ends up with Anthony Rendon with the 3rd pick, which is a swap that'll work out pretty well for both teams involved. The next big domino to fall in this draft comes at pick number 4 as Trevor Bauer becomes yet another all-star to go to the Royals in the draft. Speaking of all-stars, yeah, another one comes off the board at pick 8 as the Diamondbacks land a guy who will be one of the best shortstops in baseball with Francisco Lindor. Closing out the top 10, the Marlins land a future all-star of their own with George Springer, and with the very next pick, the Brewers land their shortstop of the future with Javier Baez. 3 picks later, with the 14th pick, the Giants land the late Jose Fernandez, meaning that they finally get to make up for their loss of guys like Winsicom, Kane, and Bumgarner over the last few drafts and land their ace. Finally, now, things begin to wind down on this draft as the last 2 important changes are Sonny Gray going to the Cubs and Joe Panik going to the Yankees, and now it's time for the 2011 regular season. We're gonna start out this season at the trade deadline as for the first time in a pretty long time, the Yankees look like serious contenders, but without Mark Teixeira, badly need a first baseman. Lucky for the Bronx Bombers, there's a pretty good one on the trade block, so the Yankees make the trade for Adrian Gonzalez. In turn, the Yankees send the Padres a package of Gary Sanchez, Ivan Nova, and Slade Heathcott. This Yankees team features 2 pitchers battling for the Cy Young, and behind winner and league MVP Clayton Kershaw, 3rd place finisher Cliff Lee, and their retooled lineup, the Yankees win 102 games and end up waltzing their way to the World Series. Over in the National League, the Cardinals win 92 games, which ends up being enough to tie for the top spot in the NL Central. Tying St. Louis is Milwaukee, and while both teams make the playoffs, it's the Cardinals who move on to the NLCS where they meet up with the 98-win Braves. For what it's worth, at times it looks like Atlanta is going to lock this series up, but at the end of the day, the 2011 7 Cardinals Magic ends up coming out on top, so St. Louis moves on to the World Series. With the Yankees awaiting, the key matchup of this series looks to be the Cardinals lineup versus that great Yankees rotation. This Yankees team has become absolutely loaded, and while St. Louis is able to steal away Clayton Kershaw's start in Game 2, Cliff Lee, Rick Porcello, and Joe Saunders are able to win out all of their starts. Meanwhile, the Yankee offense is able to do enough to get them over the hump to win ring number 24. Continuing on to the 2012 draft and offseason, Aramis Ramirez re-signs with the Cubs because the Brewers, his other option, already have a third baseman with Ryan Zimmerman, so Ramirez stays put. Moving on to the draft, after last year's draft was loaded with changes, this one's pretty light, as all that we have in the top 10 is Max Fried going to the Cubs and David Dahl going to the Red Sox. In the rest of the first round, Joey Gallo goes to the A's at 22, Michael Wacha goes to the Rockies at 15, Addison Russell goes to the Angels, and now we can go to the 2012 regular season. We start out this season with a huge trade deadline as the Red Sox still do a massive fire sale at midseason. This time, however, it's Mark Teixeira and Anibal Sanchez who join Nick Punto and Carl Crawford in LA. Over in Chicago, the Cubs do not deal Ryan Dempster at the trade deadline because they come out of absolutely nowhere to sit at 500 at the deadline and actually be in playoff contention on the back of rookie MVP Mike Trout. To get an even better contention, the Cubs make a trade that sends Sonny Gray, Matt Caesar, and some low-level prospects to the Phillies in exchange for Hunter Pence. Unfortunately for Chicago, this year is not in the cards as they're only able to win 83 games and fall just short of making the wild card. As for who will make the playoffs, the Oakland A's win 102 games, and matching them is the Yankees as the two teams tie for the top record in the AL. Both Oakland and New York advance to match up in the ALCS, where two of baseball's best pitching staffs battle for a chance to go to the World Series. Both pitching staffs do dominate, but it's the Yankees that are able to scratch out enough runs, so it's New York that advances. Over on the other side in the National League, the Cincinnati Reds return to form in 2012 as they win 97 games, and in the NLDS, they're able to beat the Braves pretty quickly to advance to the NLCS. They ride that momentum to sweep their way to the World Series, meaning that we will have a matchup of the Yankees against Derek Jeter and the Reds in the Fall Classic. As good as the Yankees were last year, having another legit Cy Young contender emerge in Chris Sale makes their rotation borderline unfair. Cincinnati's offense is unable to get anything going, and so, in short order, the Yankees make it back-to-back World Series titles. This leads us into the 2013 offseason where, with the Cubs in contend mode, they look to make a big-time move. They go to the top of the free agent board and sign the top free agent available with Zach Greinke, and to shore up their bullpen, they also had Joel Peralta and Jeremy Affeldt. This leads into the 2013 draft where the Red Sox have slid into the number 3 pick, so
The Boston Red Sox select Chris Bryant.
not only do Brian and Rizzo still get to play together in Boston, but the Red Sox somehow luck out and land the future MVP at pick number 3. Brian is not the only future All-Star to go off the board in the top 10, too, as at pick 8, the Mets get another outfield bat in Austin Meadows. In the rest of the draft, at pick 15, future batting champ Tim Anderson goes to the Giants. Down at pick 21, Dom Smith goes to the Cardinals, and now it's time for the 2013 season. Heading to Boston for the trade deadline, the Red Sox still trade for Jake Peavy, but this time they have Anthony Rizzo at first base, so the Cubs need to replace Rizzo, and the Red Sox are open to trading Mike Napoli. This means that in a 3-team trade, the Red Sox get Peavy and the Cubs get Mike Napoli, while the Phillies get an aging Alfonso Soriano and some low-level prospects from the Cubs and Jose Iglesias from the Red Sox to make the deal work. In other deadline news, the Cubs also do not trade Scott Feldman or Matt Garza because they are contenders to the tune of 92 wins on the year. It is good enough to make the playoffs, however, it's only good enough for the second wildcard in a loaded NL Central. The disappointment of the Central this season is the Cincinnati Reds, as after being in the World Series last year, Derek Jeter misses much of the season with injury and the Reds don't even get back to 500. As for the winners in the division, the Pirates win 99 games, which is good enough for second in the Central behind the 105-win Cardinals. Somehow, these 105 wins is not the top mark in all of baseball, as coming off of back-to-back back-to-back World Series titles, the Yankees go out and win 111 games. We'll come back to them in a second because we have another trade to discuss. Because the Orioles never traded for Scott Feldman, they're still looking for a starting pitcher. They go over to the other side of Chicago and acquire John Danks from the White Sox. To get it done, they send the White Sox struggling young pitchers Jake Arrieta and Pedro Strop, the same as in real life. Because Danks has extra years of control, they also add in a young pitching prospect in Josh Hader. In the short run, at least for this season, this change isn't going to change all that much because the Orioles still finish just 80 and 82 and don't make the playoffs. Who will make the playoffs is the Kansas City Royals, as on the back of their young star bats, they win 98 games and beat a really good A's team in the ALDS. There they will not match up with the Yankees, as the wildcard Rangers are able to pull off a stunning upset, with Mad Bum, Darvish, and the rest of the rotation completely shutting the Yankees offense down. This sets up for a Rangers vs Royals matchup in the ALCS between two teams that just finished beating 100-win teams in the division series. One team's dream season is going to end here, and ultimately it's Texas that comes up short and Kansas City that moves on to go to the World Series. Back over on the NL side, in their wildcard game, the Cubs take care of business against the Pirates. In turn, they ride that momentum to go and meet up with the Royals in the World Series. In this series of teams looking to end long championship droughts, it's Chicago that gets out to an early series lead. Zack Greinke puts up 7 innings of 2-run ball in Game 1, and after the Cubs put up a comeback win in Game 2, the Royals can never really recover. The Cubs win the 2013 World Series in 5 games, and after hitting a home run in all 4 Cubs wins, Mike Napoli is named the World Series MVP. As we head into the 2014 offseason, because 2014 was the last season of Derek Jeter's career, it'll be the last year that we cover in this video. As for what happens in this offseason, the Cubs sign Irvin Santana to help fill out their rotation. Over in Pittsburgh, the Pirates sign World Series MVP Mike Napoli to fill their need at first base. With the rest of this free agent class, the Mariners still sign Robinson Cano, the Yankees still massively overpay for Jacoby Ellsbury, and now it's time for the 2014 draft. The changes in this draft start in the back half of the top 10, as with the 8th pick, Michael Conforto goes to the Angels. With the next pick, Kyle Schwarber heads to the Mets at 9, with the only changes for the rest of the draft being Brandon Finnegan going to the Reds and Sean Newcomb going to the Dodgers. We can look at the 2014 season. Unfortunately, in this season, Derek Jeter's farewell tour is not a good season for the Reds, as in his final year, they win just 70 games. Looking now at the trade deadline, the Cubs again do not sell, as they do not trade any of Jeff Samardzija, Jason Hamill, or Darwin Barney. Another team that does not sell at the deadline is the Boston Red Sox, as on the back of Anthony Rizzo, they're able to make themselves at least sort of buyers. As a result, John Lester, Johnny Gomes, and Jake Peavy are all not traded at this year's deadline. Because they are sort of buyers, and because Jackie Bradley is putrid at the plate in 2014, one trade the Red Sox do make is for Dexter Fowler. To get him, they send the Astros a package that's centered around Devin Marrero. Of the two sellers turned buyers this year, one of the two teams makes the playoffs, as with Mike Trout earning his 3rd MVP in the first 3 full seasons of his career, the Cubs win 91 games and are able to top the Central. Because the NL is really weak this year, the Cubs end up not having any trouble advancing all the way to the World Series. Looking at the contenders in the American League, the Yankees are somehow again able to match their 111 wins from last season. In addition to their dominant Big Three, Rick Porcello puts up the best season of his career so far, and a rookie Masahiro Tanaka posts an ERA under 3. This year, they will make it past the ALDS, and meeting them there is the reigning AL champion Royals, who are fresh off a 108-win season. In this ALCS featuring the teams with the 2 best records in the AL, it's Kansas City that comes in with all the momentum, and it's Kansas City that comes in with a much better offense. Because of those 2 factors, Kansas City is able to take down New York for a rematch with the Cubs in the World Series. This version of the series starts off pretty much the exact opposite as the first time, as the Royals jump on Zack Greinke for an 8-1 win in Game 1. From there, things are pretty easy for Kansas City, as in a sweep, the Kansas City Royals are your 2014 World Series champions.